Sigmund Freud, 1856 to 1939. The creator of psychoanalysis. Sigmund Freud was born on May 6, 1856, in Freiburg, Moravia, now the Czech Republic. Freud's mother was his father's second wife, and she was 20 years younger than his father. Freud had two older half-brothers that were around 20 years older than he was. Also, he was the first of 7 children from his mother. At the age of 4, Freud moved from Moravia to Vienna, Austria, where he would spend the majority of his life, despite having claimed to dislike the city. Freud did well in school, and because he was Jewish, though he later came to identify as an atheist, he attended medical school at the University of Vienna in 1873. Medicine and law were the only viable options available to Jewish men at that time in Vienna. Though Freud wished to pursue neuropsychological research positions were extremely hard to come by. As a result, Freud moved into private practice with a focus in neurology. While training, Freud befriended a physician and psychologist by the name of Joseph Breuer. This relationship would prove to be incredibly important to the development of Freud's work once Breuer began treating hysteria patients by using hypnosis and encouraging them to talk about their past. The process of hypnosis, which Breuer's patient Anna O. referred to as the talking cure, allowed patients to discuss memories that they could not recall during a conscious state, and as a result, the symptoms of their hysteria would be relieved. Freud co-authored studies in hysteria with Breuer, and then traveled to Paris to learn more about hypnosis under the renowned French neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot. In 1886, Freud returned to Vienna and began a private practice. Originally, Freud used hypnosis on his neurosis and hysteria patients, but he soon realized that he could get more out of patients by having them sit in a relaxed position, like on a couch, and by encouraging them to say whatever was on their mind, known as free association. By doing so, Freud believed he would be able to analyze what was said and determine what traumatic event in the past was responsible for the patient's current suffering. Freud's most famous works came in quick succession. In the span of 5 years, he released 3 books that would impact psychology for decades to come. 1900's The Interpretation of Dreams, in which he introduced the world to the idea of the unconscious mind. 1901's The Psychopathology of Everyday Life, where he theorized that slips of the tongue, later known as Freudian slips, were actually meaningful comments revealed by the dynamic unconscious. And 1905's 3 essays on the theory of sexuality, where among other things, he spoke of the now famous Oedipus complex. A leading scientific mind of his day, Freud found himself gaining unwanted attention when, in 1933, the Nazi regime came to power in Germany and began burning his works. In 1938, the Nazis seized Austria and Freud had his passport confiscated. It was only due to his international fame and the influence of foreigners that Freud was allowed to move to England, where he remained until his death in 1939.
Stages of psychosexual development. Freud's theory of psychosexual development is one of the most well-known and controversial theories in psychology. Freud believed that personality was, for the most part, established by the time a person was 6 years old, and that when a predetermined sequence of stages was successfully completed, it would result in a healthy personality, while failure to do so would lead to an unhealthy personality. Freud believed that the stages in the sequence were based on erogenous zones, sensitive parts of the body that arouse sexual pleasure, desire, and stimulation, and that failure to complete a stage would make a child fixated on that erogenous zone. This would lead the person to over or underindulge once he or she was an adult. Oral stage, birth to 18 months. In this stage, a child focuses on oral pleasures like sucking because they create a sense of comfort and trust. If there is too little or too much gratification in this stage, the child will develop an oral personality or oral fixation and become preoccupied with oral behaviors. According to Freud, people with this type of personality are more likely to bite their nails, smoke, drink, or overeat, and will be gullible, depend on other people, and will always be followers. Anal stage, 18 months to 3 years. During this stage, a child's main focus turns towards bladder and bowel control, and a child gains pleasure from controlling these activities. Freud believed that success was achieved in this stage as a result of parents using praise and rewards while toilet training, leaving their child feeling capable and productive. Such behavior would lead to the child having a competent, creative personality later on in life. If parents were too lenient to the child during toilet training, he believed, it could lead to an anal expulsive personality and the child would be destructive, messy, and wasteful. If the parents took an approach that was too strict or forced toilet training too soon, this could lead to an anal retentive personality, and the child would develop an obsession with perfection, cleanliness, and control. Phallic stage, 3 to 6 years. At this stage, Freud believed the pleasure zones turn towards the genitals, giving rise to one of his most famous ideas, that of the Oedipus complex. Freud believed that, at this stage, a boy unconsciously develops a sexual desire for his mother, sees his father as competition for her affection, and wishes to replace his father. Additionally, the boy will develop castration anxiety as he begins to view his father as someone who is trying to punish him for his Oedipal feelings. Rather than fight with the father, however, the boy will identify with him in an effort to vicariously possess the mother. Fixation at this stage, Freud believed, could lead to sexual deviance and being confused about or having a weak sexual identity. In 1913, Carl Jung coined the term the Electra complex, which describes a similar relationship that young girls experience with their fathers. Freud disagreed with this concept, however, believing that girls were actually experiencing penis envy, where resentment and discontent exist because the girls wish that they, themselves, had a penis. Latency stage, 6 years to puberty. At this stage, sexual urges are suppressed and the sexual energy of the child is directed towards other exchanges like social interactions and intellectual activities. It is during this stage that children play mostly with children of the same sex, and there is no psychosexual development or fixation that occurs. Genital stage, puberty to adulthood. The last stage in Freud's model involves the reawakening of sexual urges and a sexual interest in the opposite sex. If all of the previous stages were completed successfully, the person will be caring and well-balanced, and pleasure will be focused on the genitals. If there is fixation at this stage, the individual may have sexual perversions. Of course, Freud's theory does have its critics. Freud focused almost exclusively on the development of the male. His research was not based on the behavior of children, but rather on what he was told by his adult patients. Because of the long delay between the hypothetical childhood cause and the eventual adulthood effect in his theories, it is incredibly difficult to measure or test whether Freud's ideas of psychosexual development are accurate. Structural models of personality. In addition to his conceptions of psychosexual development, Freud believed that there were numerous other driving forces at play that were important to understanding the development of a person's personality. His structural model of personality attempts to describe how the mind works by making distinctions between 3 parts of personality and the human mind, the id, the ego, and the superego. Id. Every person is born with an id. The id is responsible for getting the newborn child's basic needs met. Freud claimed that the id is based on something known as a pleasure principle, which essentially means the id wants whatever feels good at that precise moment and disregards any ramifications. There is no consideration for how the rest of the situation might play out, or for any other people involved. For example, when a baby is hurt, wants something to eat, needs to be changed, or simply wants the attention of others, the id drives the baby to cry until its needs are met. Ego. The next aspect of the personality, the ego, begins developing naturally over the first 3 years as a result of the child interacting with the world around him. Because of this, Freud claimed that the ego is based on something he referred to as a reality principle. The ego comes to realize that there are other people around that also have desires and needs, and that impulsive, selfish behavior can actually lead to harm. The ego has to consider the reality of any particular circumstance, while also meeting the needs of the id. For example, when a child thinks twice about doing something inappropriate because he understands the negative outcome that will occur, this is the ego asserting itself. Superego. The superego develops when a child is 5 years old and is nearing the end of the phallic stage. This is the part of our personality that is made up of morals and ideals that have been acquired and placed on us by society and our parents. Many people also find the superego to be equivalent to the conscience, since both terms have come to refer to the part of our personality that judges what is right from what is wrong. Freud believed that, in a truly healthy person, the ego would be stronger than the id and superego so that it could consider the reality of the situation, while both meeting the needs of the id and making sure the superego was not disturbed. In the case of the superego being strongest, a person will be guided by very strict morals, and if the id is strongest, a person will seek pleasure over morality and could end up causing great harm. Rape, for example, is when one chooses pleasure-seeking over morality, and is a sign of a strong id. Freud's conception of the human psyche. Freud believed that our feelings, beliefs, impulses, and underlying emotions were buried in our unconscious, and therefore not available to the waking mind. However, Freud also believed that there were levels of consciousness beyond just conscious or unconscious. To better understand Freud's theory, imagine an iceberg. The water surrounding the iceberg is known as the non-conscious. This is everything that has not become part of our conscious. These are things we have not experienced and are not aware of, and therefore, they do not become part of or shape our personalities in any way. The tip of the iceberg, our conscious, is only a very small portion of our personality, and since it's the only part of ourselves that we're familiar with, we actually know very little of what makes up our personality. The conscious contains thoughts, perceptions, and everyday cognition. Directly below the conscious, at the base of the iceberg, is the preconscious or subconscious. If prompted, the preconscious mind can be accessed, but it is not actively part of our conscious and requires a little digging. Things such as childhood memories, our old telephone number, the name of a friend we had when we were younger, and any other deeply stored memories are found in this area. It is in the preconscious mind that the superego can be found. Since we are only aware of the tip of the iceberg at any given time, the unconscious is incredibly large and consists of those buried, inaccessible layers of our personality. It is here that we find things like fears, immoral urges, shameful experiences, selfish needs, irrational wishes, and unacceptable sexual desires. This is also where the id can be found. The ego is not fixed to one particular part of the iceberg and can be found in the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious. The iceberg metaphor. There is no denying just how influential Sigmund Freud was to the fields of psychology and psychiatry. His ideas completely changed the way people viewed personality, sexuality, memory, and therapy, and he is perhaps the most well-known psychologist in the popular vernacular a century after he first arrived as a notable scholar of the mind.